Hello again, this is the 23rd of July 2021 and this is a continuation of my last Orty Thoughty. I realised afterwards, after I'd watched it through and everything, that I never said anything about how the fetus grows during pregnancy, how it affects your body, and nothing at all about how hormonal fluctuations affect mood, and also a few other things that I thought I might mention, but didn't. Anyway, I'll start with the hormonal fluctuations affecting mood, because that is something that I think is a really big misconception, and it does lead sort of quite nicely into the stages of pregnancy, because when you talk about women who are pre-menstrual, it makes them feel upset, angry, sad, ill sometimes. The sort of stock phrase is, oh, my hormones are going crazy. Oh, I'm feeling hormonal, And it's actually completely false. Your period time, the time that you're actually bleeding, it's a trough hormonally. The progesterone and the estrogen and the FSH and everything just go woof, when that's what triggers the bleeding, all the hormone levels falling. The time when they're all up and down is more around ovulation time. And from an evolutionary point of view, it's beneficial for you to want to go out and find a partner at this point. So it's the estrogen that rises as you're about to ovulate. It sort of gives you a feeling of being motivated, of being happy, of sort of increasing your sex drive, of making you sort of feel more inclined to be chatty and friendly. And then as that drops away, you feel less so. And the progesterone also, that kind of starts preparing your body for a pregnancy, and it increases your blood flow and to your womb and everything, and it kind of it makes you sort of feel healthy, I suppose. Perhaps that's not really scientific. Makes you feel healthy. I don't know. And then that drops away, and the dropping away of the progesterone as well, that triggers the bleeding. But yes, the period is an emotion, a low point in terms of your hormone levels, and that is why you feel in a slump. It's like a come down. After being on a drug that made you feel euphoric, you sort of fall into a big slump afterwards, like having a sugar rush and then a crash, And the effects of, the premenstrual slump can feel quite severe for a lot of people. I mean, there's still doctors who don't believe in it. I know for a fact that I get headaches before I have a period, that I get indigestion, that I feel very tired. That I know this because it happens every month. And then I feel like that for maybe 3-4 days. I feel quite emotionally low, quite sad. And then, the bleeding starts, and I know it's going to happen, because that's just what it feels like for me. It's absolutely certain that this is going to happen. People who kind of suffer chronic conditions, like chronic pain conditions or asthma or fibromyalgia or anything like that, they often find that their symptoms get worse before their period, Some people feel sad, some feel angry, some don't feel any different emotionally. But they feel different physically. It's another of those things that affects everyone differently. Some people get it very badly, some people don't get it at all. And period pain as well. That's just the feeling of the uterus shedding. It's called this deciduum, the lining of the uterus. In much the same way as a deciduous tree. It's one that loses its leaves and then regrows them. The deciduum is the part of the uterus that comes out and then regrows. That's what period pain is, the feeling of the uterus shedding its deciduum. For anyone who hasn't actually felt it, I'll try and describe it as best I can. Imagine you're standing with your back against a wall, okay? And then someone tries to push their thumbs sort of right into just where your hip bones are, just the soft bit next to your hip bone, right? And leans on you with all their weight. And then occasionally just gives you a little jab, just for fun. That's as well as I can describe what period pain is like. Again, some people get it very, very badly. I've been brought to tears by it a couple of times. Usually I feel the need to take a painkiller. Sometimes it doesn't really bother me at all. I just get on with my day and feel a bit, to use the correct medical term, a bit. But some people are, crippled by it. Again, it's one of those things that, you'll know your own body and what it does and how it feels for you. And it does change every time your period stops and starts again, because you're pregnant or you're ill or you're on hormonal contraception or whatever. It will come back feeling slightly different. And sometimes your cycle might be slightly longer or shorter, or, you feel different at different times and things. But, yes, you will know your own cycle, I'm sure. And I do find it a bit strange that we talk about, how women feel and behave around their periods a lot more than around ovulation, because, that is when, the hormones are going up and down, and that's, what you need to know if you are trying to conceive or trying not to conceive. When you are at your peak fertility. That's sort of a few days before the egg appears and maybe a day or so afterwards, before it disintegrates. I think probably the clearest sign that the ovulation is about to happen is the egg white mucus. Cervixes and vaginas, they're always producing fluids. There's various different fluids that appear at different points in the cycle. Sometimes it's very thick, one that completely blocks up the cervix so no sperm can come through. That's sort of between ovulation and, the start of the period. Sometimes it disappears completely, so, the blood can pass through and the uterine lining can completely refresh itself. But at the time of ovulation, it looks like egg white. And there's quite a lot of it, you'll see it on your toilet paper and see it in your pants and everything, and it's sort of gelatinous and clear. And I tend to think of it more of a snot than egg white. But yeah, that is a pretty sure sign when you see that you are about to ovulate. And that happens because the cervix is open, it's prepared for, sperm getting in, and it's apparently it also sort of acts as a kind of medium for the sperm to swim through. You know, they find it very easy to get through that fluid, more so than, you know, swimming through an empty uterus. And they can live in it for quite a long time. It sort of maximises their lifespan. They'll sort of stay active in that for maybe 4 or 5 days. Yes, so when the sperm swum through the egg white mucus, they've found an egg, it is fertilised. What happens to the producer of that egg? I did realise when I was watching about the first one, I did keep assuming that this was a woman who was having her eggs fertilised. I apologise if that feels exclusionary to non-binary and transgender people. I would like this to be an inclusive space, or at least a hostile environment for the kind of people who get outraged by inclusivity. Anyway, I'll try and fix that as well as best I can. I'll try and use gender neutral terms. Anyway, so the fertilised egg, at this point it's just about visible. It's like a little speck of dust. There's some lovely words that I use to describe the ovule at various points in its journey. As soon as it's fertilised, it's called a zygote. Zygote. And a zygote, the cell starts to divide into 2 and 4 and 8. And then when it divides into 16, I don't know what the distinction is there, but at this point it is no longer a zygote, it is a morula. 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 It's still the same size. It's a big mass of cells at this point. It does sometimes at this point, as a zygote, divide into twins or triplets. I mean, this is how you get identical multiple births. If another egg is present, sometimes, 2, 3, any number of eggs might be possibly released at the same time and get fertilised. It can be a genetic thing. It can be just a little accidental quirk that happens now and then. Or sometimes if you take fertility drugs to stimulate ovulation, you do end up with just all the eggs coming out at once. So yes, more than one egg can be fertilised and implanted at the same time, and they will grow into non-identical twins or triplets or quads or whatever else. And it's not impossible that, you have one egg that divides and another egg that doesn't. You can have some pair of identical triplets with a non-identical sibling, these things happen. I was saying morula. Yes, the morula has 16 cells. After that, the cells just divide like crazy. They start specialising into different purposes, different kinds of cell that do different things. At this point, it is a blastocyst, and it begins to grow. Now, a blastocyst, it's about the size of a poppy seed. It's well and truly visible, but very, very small. The outside of it, there's a ring of cells called a trophoblast, and that is the wall of the cell. And this is the bit that implants. It lands on the I've seen in the deciduum at some point, and begins to grow what's called cords, which, the cells start dividing into long chains which act as roots to anchor it into the deciduum, and then the deciduum grows over the top of it. So it's actually buried in the flesh of the uterine wall. It has a gap inside it, which is called the holoblast, and that becomes the amniotic sac and the fluid. And a little blob of cells, one little, it doesn't have corners, does it? It's round, one side of it, I suppose, one part of it, called the embryoblast. And that, as its name suggests, is what becomes the embryo. Now, after this takes about a week. It takes a week to get from fertilisation to implantation. And all the time it is releasing hormones, which sort of stimulate the production of progesterone in the body, to tell the body that it is going to be pregnant, and we need to increase the hormones to support this pregnancy, to stop the body rejecting the little blastocyst. So we have an implanted blastocyst with a little weighted side. Right, these cells inside the blastocyst start to arrange themselves into two sections. One becomes the placenta and the other the embryo. And they're linked together. And the embryo, this is about the 4th week of pregnancy. I mean, by this time, some hormones have been released. You may have noticed it's kind of feeling like you're about to have a period, but it's a week early. You get your usual premenstrual symptoms, which I'm sure you all know about. Your headache, your indigestion, your whatever else you get. And also implantation bleeding. As the trophoblast begins to put its cords into the deciduum, sometimes, some blood vessels break and a bit of blood comes out. And it's called bleeding. It's not like a period, It's not a big rush of blood or anything. It's a sort of mucky brown mark in your pants. Any more than that, and you've maybe you ought to see somebody. Anyway, this is the 3rd week. When the blastocyst is getting implanted. The 4th week is when the placenta and the embryo start to separate. They're still linked together. And the blastocyst doesn't really grow a huge amount at this point. It's just the cells dividing and becoming more specialised. And then the part that is going to become the embryo, this is around the 4th week, begins to layer itself. There's the ectoblast. No, hang on, got confused. The ectoderm on the outside. That becomes skin, hair, nerves. Mesoderm, just underneath that, which becomes the blood and the bones, the circulatory system, not necessarily blood, the blood vessels and the heart, and the skeleton. Right in the very middle is the endoderm, which becomes the vital organs. And it starts to bend itself over like a little mushroom. And then it rolls up into a tube, and this becomes the digestive system. It's kind of like a ginger snap. They roll up ginger snaps. It's like a tube that's rolled up with a hole at each end, and that's your mouth and your bumhole. They're there at 4 weeks gestation. Now, for someone who has a 28-day cycle, that's average-ish, most common. This will be about the time that they notice that they have a late period. This is also the time from which pregnancy tests are guaranteed. You can sometimes get a positive result a few days before the missed period. Sometimes I've had positive tests at 12 days after ovulation, but it's generally very, very faint. Sometimes you can't even be sure that it is a positive. But yeah, from 14 days after ovulation, they are guaranteed. And that is usually, most often, the date that your period would be due. Obviously, if you have a longer cycle, you wouldn't know for a while yet. But yes, generally the most definite sign that most people notice is that they miss a period. And that is what prompts them to get a test, unless they were sort of aware that they were getting their period symptoms early and that they noticed their implantation bleeding, which again, not everybody gets. It can happen. It doesn't always. And it's not always a reliable indicator of pregnancy. I mean, these things can just happen. You know, you might just be a bit under the weather for any sort of reason, really. And I suppose that's probably why people are surprised to find out that they are pregnant. I mean, I certainly never was. I mean, I knew straight away that something was up, but yeah, some people do not notice the symptoms for various reasons. And I've known of two people who didn't realise until well into pregnancy. One found out when she was 7 months, one at 8 months, and just sort of noticed that they were getting these kind of abdominal pains and putting on weight and thinking, what's going on here, and went to the doctor and were told, you do realise you are pregnant. Right, so over 4 weeks, we have the ectoderm, mesoderm and endoderm, and the embryo has become a little tube with a mouth and a bumhole attached to the placenta. The placenta doesn't really get functioning for at least another 2 months. At this point, the embryo develops a yolk sac, which is just a little blob that it kind of absorbs energy from. I'm not sure exactly how the yolk sac develops, but yes, it has one of those sort of in the blastocyst with it. I don't really understand how that happens, but anyway, maybe as the cells are dividing, they divide into the yolk sac as well, and that they're sort of specialised cells that produce energy. Don't know. Well, I'll move on from yolk sac because I don't really know what they are or how they work. By the 5th week, the embryo is stretched out. It has developed a head. It starts to develop little limbs, and they're not limbs that you recognise. They're just sort of little bumps that will eventually grow into limbs. At 6 weeks, this is generally about the time that the heart starts to be noticeable and starts to beat. And also around this time is generally the time that you can be sure to see something if you have a scan. It's big enough to be picked up by a scan. And the limbs continue to grow by about 8 weeks. The hands and feet are developing. They have fingers and toes. By 9 weeks, it's kind of looking more or less like, you could recognise it as a baby. It's got a definite head with kind of facial features on it, and arms and legs with fingers and toes, and it no longer has a tail like a tadpole. It has the umbilical cord has attached to the placenta, and the placenta is sort of getting rooted into the deciduum. Then 12 weeks. 12 weeks is the end of the, no, hang on. I'm not sure it's 12 or 13 weeks that's considered the end of the first trimester. And the first trimester is very much, oh look at there, there's my cuckoo clock again, cuckoo clock. I'll try and talk over it. Right, the first trimester is very much concerned with, just bringing this tiny speck of next to nothing into roughly human form. I think it's the most interesting trimester. It's the one where most happens. Now, I know a lot of people who have been through a pregnancy say the first trimester was when they felt extremely sick, and then after that it just faded away to nothing. I think I was probably most sick in my first trimester, but it never went away. People kept saying to me, oh, it'll go away at the end of the first trimester, and it didn't. And then they start saying, oh, it'll go away at 16 weeks, and it didn't. And they say, oh, it'll go away at 20 weeks, and it didn't. After that, I managed to get some antiemetics, and that was when I sort of finally had a few puke-free days. But yeah, it never really left me, the sickness. I mean, I was even throwing up when I was in labour, Anyway, the second trimester, it doesn't really change particularly. It just becomes, more functional as a body. It becomes sort of more proportional. As an embryo, it has a huge head and a tiny little body and minuscule little legs, as if you're looking at it from above. The second trimester, the body starts to grow and the legs a little bit more, so it sort of fits into the the same sort of proportions. Now 24 weeks is considered viability. That means that legally you're no longer allowed to abort the fetus. If you give birth after 24 weeks, it's considered a premature birth, and the medical team are obliged to try at least have a good go at saving it. If you give birth before 24 weeks, it's considered a miscarriage. You don't have to register that you gave the birth or the death, and you do if it's after 24. I mean, there is a grey area between 22 and 24 weeks when occasionally a baby will be born that might make it, so it's kind of up to the doctor in charge at the time to say whether they're going to try and save this baby or not. It's very likely at that time that they will sort of have severe brain damage because they're just not prepared for the outside world at that time. Their lungs don't automatically inflate, their eyes don't open, they're absolutely minuscule, the skin hasn't really developed. They're very, very tiny, very, very delicate. It's sort of touch and go whether it's whether anything can be saved of this very tiny life. As you get more towards 30 weeks, it becomes very likely that your baby will survive if it's born early. Apparently, the chances of survival if born at 30 weeks are 90%. At 35 weeks, it's considered near term. That means they won't even, be taken to the special care unit unless, there's some sort of cause for concern. 38 weeks is considered term. That means they are, fully developed, ready to just be taken home, unless, as I say, there is a cause for concern. 40 weeks is, you know, the general expected gestation period. But if this baby just doesn't appear, if you get to 42 weeks, at this point you are automatically induced. I talked about induction in the first film. Not a pleasant process, not something you really want, but then no birth is particularly fun. Twins are often born early, triplets even earlier. The more babies present, the less likely they are to be carried to term, and so the more likely they are to be born at very low birth weight. What else was I going to say? Oh yes, this is a completely different subject, but I did just want to talk about the homunculus, the legend of the homunculus. I mean, all this about, you know, ovulation and hormone levels and things, this is all surprisingly recent science. I mean, you know, last century or so, these things have been discovered. Up until the 18th century, it was commonly believed that a uterus was basically an incubator for a tiny little creature called a homunculus, which a man creates in his semen and, you know, sort of embeds in the woman, and then she sort of incubates it until it's big enough to, you know, pop out and be a human. It's quite an odd belief. I don't know why people believe that, but this, I mean, it dominated medical science for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Apparently the ancient Chinese believed that you had twins. The second twin to come out was actually the oldest because it meant they were put in first. And I just find it incredible how, you know, people didn't know. You know, even, you know, doctors who cut up women's bodies in autopsies, you know, they didn't know what ovaries were for or fallopian tubes or anything. How did that go on? No women could sort of tell that they were ovulating. Nobody sort of really understood what a period was until maybe a couple of 100 years ago. Isn't that strange? It's like tectonic plate movement, you know, that's the understanding of tectonic plate movement. It's just sort of common knowledge, but you know, it's only a couple of decades old. You know, there are still people disputing it in, you know, 1970s, 1980s. You know, there's still people who don't believe in climate change. Yeah, so we're at the 34th minute again. I'll leave it there. I'll tell you if I think of any more interesting things that I need to bring to public attention. To the attention of my 22 subscribers. My 4 loyal followers. Thanks. I can always be sure of 4 views. Thank you. And I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye, Zed. Bye-bye. He says bye-bye, I'm sure.